Hey fam, welcome back. Hopefully you're doing good and having a great day. If you're not, please let me know what I can do to help you. Until then, I know I haven't sat down with you guys and had a conversation with you on the couch. And so today I figured I'd go ahead and do that. And so what we're talking about today is the red pill. What is the red pill really? There's this misconception that the red pill is about men and women. But what it actually is that it goes well beyond men and women. Because the red pill is about understanding human nature, which explains to how all of us got here, right? All of the problems that we have, all of the things that we have to work on, of course, both men and women, but more than that, right? It's society, culture, the issues that we have with the oligarchs today, our government, everything. When you begin to see things for how they really are, you begin to understand why it is that we're here, how we got here, and what we can do to get out of this problem. That is the actual red pill, right? So you really have to start by researching human nature. How is it that humans react with each other, not just individually, but as a tribe? And to begin with that, you have to understand how men and women respond to one another, how men and women, right, complement each other, what actually works. And listen, we're just like any other animal on this planet, right? And there's always going to be a hierarchy. That's just how nature is. There's always going to be someone at the top and someone at the very bottom. Now, the difference between us and other animals is because we have such a complex way of thinking. At I mean, you don't see dogs building bridges. You know, I know that's a little silly, but it's just the truth. You don't see that, and it's because of our complex way of thinking that we have actually constructed religion, morals, and values, character, right? And ever since we have begun to move into pastoral life, some multiple thousands of years ago, we began to think outside the box, think for ourselves. And that's when we began to progress our species. But it's always been an instinct, right? It's always been an instinctual reaction to coexist with one another, to have that companionship. That's the word I'm looking for. That companionship. And so when you understand what women are looking for, what men are looking for, how they react with one another, how they respond to one another, and ultimately how they complement each other, you really begin to understand why things don't work today. And so we'll explain that really quickly, just very briefly. Women are looking for men who are strong, capable, truly masculine, guys who can go out and procure resources, right? Bring back resources, game, money, any kind of currency, right? And so women find that extremely attractive. Women will always go for men who are very capable like that, as well as being protective. If she knows that she is safe around you and she doesn't have to worry about a fucking thing, it's game over, bro. She's not going to leave you at all as long as you maintain that. And then likewise for men, men are looking for women who are obedient. And when I mean obedient, I mean supportive, caring, nurturing, right? And submissive. Not that she's a doormat, but that she understands the value that a man brings, right? Or she understands the value that a man brings, right? And she also understands that there is a head to the house. There is one way that things work. And it's not her being at the head. It's not her being any kind of. Now, here's the thing. Now, here is also the thing as well, is that as you create your own tribe, right, through having children and their children and those children having their children, there's going to be a patriarchy and a matriarchy, right? And that's why everyone is always going to respect the grandfather and the grandmother, right? Because they have that authority. They've been around a lot longer than what everyone else has, and so everyone typically respects what they say, right? Man or woman, it doesn't matter. The grandfather's going to have a lot more weight to his authority than the grandmother is, because right, he's the head of the house. He's always been the head of the house, and that hasn't changed. But both have authority. The thing is, the grandfather has authority over everyone, and the grandmother has typically authority over the children and the younger women. And so that's typically the case, right? But when it comes to immediate families, everyone is going to follow the men's lead. And that's simply because men, whether you believe we were designed that way or not, nature will always show us who we really are. And so men are always going to be the ones that have to lead, because the women are going to look for men who can do that, right? And likewise, men are going to look for women who are going to expect them to lead, not let them lead, expect them to, right? Women do not want to be in a position where they make every single decision, where they even make half of the decisions. Women want to know that as a man, you can take care of everything. Now, that doesn't mean everything inside the home and and outside. Excuse me. Men's duty is to outside of the home. Now, if there's something that needs to be fixed within the home, like mudding a wall because there was a hole in there, or maybe some electrical work, that's also fine, right? It's the service of intensive labor, essentially, right? Such as cleaning the gutters, mowing the lawn, taking the trash out, right? Stuff that has something to do with outside the home, right? This is also why historically men have always been the ones who have built tree houses for their children. Men love to build. We love to do things with our own hands. And so that's how that's always worked. And women's duty have always been inside the home. The safety net of being in a loving, caring home, taking care of the house and the children. Women will always be happiest married and with children. The thing is, though, today is that it doesn't benefit men to be married at all. And with the biases in the courts, and then also the laws and policies, it's not beneficial for men to get married at all. I've talked about this several times, and I can guarantee you all of us already know about this, right? And then with the first marriage rate being a 45 to 50% divorce rate, right? And then that going up to about 70 for second marriages, it's not it's a no-go. It's a no-go. And so that really brings us to opening our eyes with men and women, understanding how men and women are with according to their own nature, but how they react and respond to each other. Then you can begin to see that, or excuse me, understand human nature, right? And then nature between men and women, how they are within themselves and then with each other. And then you also begin to understand how people react collectively in a tribe. So again, when it comes to tribes, cities, city-states, nations, I've already spoke about this so much. There's a hierarchy, and just as I was saying earlier, with any other animal kingdom, there's going to be a hierarchy, right? And it's always going to be men who are at the top, always, unless there is a monarchy, right, where bloodline dictates the royalty or the leadership, right? And we've seen all throughout history of examples of hierarchies, monarchies, whatever. Or I mean, I guess hierarchy would be a monarchy too, but um, we've seen different examples of hierarchies. I guess you could probably phrase it that way. But historically, right, men have always been the ones who have had to step up and serve, right, in that leadership capacity. Um, because today, where it's a lot easier to understand how a society without men, without strong, capable men, actually plays out, right? And it typically collapses very soon. We're seeing that play out with our own society today. We have beaten men down so bad that men are outright giving up. And then a lot of us are wondering why society is beginning to collapse. And I tell you guys this every single time I talk about men and women's issues. Men are always the one who maintain and builds, or excuse me, who build and maintain societies. If men are not doing good, nobody is doing good. Okay? Men will always be respected because of their commitment to, I should say, um, create rules, right? Create rules and maintain and enforce those rules. Women do not have the capability to enforce rules, not like men do. So, you want to know exactly what a society where men are not at the top look like? Take, for example, the incident in the UK where the female officers were running around trying to arrest men for catcalling them. I know it's a little bit of a silly example, but this is the kind of thing that actually happens. This is what happens. Women become more confrontational with men who are not respectable by either men or women, right? And weak men are exactly that. Weak men are not respected by capable, strong, masculine men or women at all, because women do not see weak men as men. You have to understand that women have a certain view of what a man is, what a man should be, right? And if a man does not fit that, he's not respected. That's why I tell you guys, look after yourselves, both mind and body. Now, this goes for women too, because I'll get to women here in a second. Look after yourselves, both mind and body, right? You want to be fit. Why? Because you want to not just protect yourself, right? Because if you eventually have a family, you also have to protect them too, because that is your responsibility. They will be expecting you to. Those kids can't fend for themselves. They can't protect themselves against a grown woman or a grown man. It's not capable for them. And for women, it's not capable for them to defend themselves against a man, an average man. Women cannot fend themselves. Women cannot fend, or I should say, average women cannot fend off average men. It's just they don't they don't have the capability to do so. They have to utilize other means for self protection, such as mace, tasers, firearms. They have to use weapons. They have to. It's an equalizer. That's why I always tell women, go out, get yourself a means to protect yourself. You can get a knife. You can get a baton like Locos Tacos, 6930 with a series, questionable series of numbers. You can get that, or you can get yourself a firearm, but you are going to need a weapon. Now, these days, of course, I mean, any day, but anyone should really have a means of protecting themselves, anyways. Right? We're just like any other animal. We'll start fights over anything. But especially women. And so women are going to be looking for men who can protect themselves or who can protect them. And you have to be that, right? Now, for women, you also have to understand that when something is happening between men, you have to stay out of it. You must stay out of it because if you take either side, I mean, unfortunately, and this is where things really go south for women, and I can really understand the plight of women here. If anything happens, right, and the guy that you are closest to, whether it's your dad or your boyfriend, husband, happens to be incapacitated for whatever reason, you're on your own. And that could go really, really bad in a lot of different situations. The best thing about being a woman is that you are protected by capable, strong men. The worst thing about being a woman is that you are at the mercy of men as well, right? And so that's why, ladies, you have to be so, so, so careful about which men that you choose, right? Don't just choose men who give you the tingles, right? Give you the butterflies, right? You got to look at things from a very logical, very instinctive point of view. Can he provide for me? Can he protect me? Does he have good character? Does he have good values? Is there a future that he wants to work toward? Is he working towards that goal? What are his ambitions, right? How does he treat his family? And the same thing for men, right? Is she caring? How does she treat her family? Is she expecting you to make the decisions for her? Is she expecting you to lead and guide every interaction that you guys are in? Right? Does she love children? Is she good with children? Does she want to be a mother? And so these are the things that really, really matter when it comes to, not just men and women, but society as a whole. Because the more people understand how men and women operate, we understand how we interact within society itself. Because our protective instinct or our protective instincts are going to drive us to take up those leadership roles, either being a king or a president, congressman, or just uh, going into the warrior class, right? As a soldier, a marine, an airman, a sailor, whatever. But when you understand that, how exactly did we get here? Because it wasn't so long ago, actually, that we began to see a lot of things change into what we see now. And well, that is simply because men men were weakened. A lot of really strong men, I would say in the 40s, obviously went off to war. A lot of them were killed, unfortunately. And so when the men came back, there wasn't a whole lot of strong, capable men, enough for the women to go to. And well, that being the case, unfortunately, that was just enough to then push a certain ideology, because all of this stuff began to really happen, and you can see a whole lot of difference, just by how um, wages stagnated starting from the 60s. So pretty much the 60s was the best time for America because men could afford women, children, could afford, families, cars, dogs, the American dream, right? But something shifted. And even though the 60s were a turning point, it there was something that happened that kind of snowballed to this point. And what a lot of people don't realize is that feminism was never exactly what it was supposed to be. Feminism was always propped up as women fighting for, their rights, women fighting for to be equal. Here's the thing that a lot of people misunderstand anyways is that simply based on how nature is, no one is equal. Nobody. It is your capability that makes you who you are. And unfortunately, there's always going to be someone better off than you or worse off than you simply on genetics. It's just how it is, right? And this is what I was getting to earlier when I was talking about hierarchy. Men cannot or women cannot compete with men. You just can't do it. They just can't do it. They cannot collect resources like men can. They cannot fight like men can. They cannot handle stress like men can. It's just how it is. It's just nature. That's why we have always been the ones who have done this, right? So, um, I think I lost my I think I lost my train of thought there. I got off on a different topic. You guys know me. Uh, so yeah, society, right? In the 18 in the late 1800s, there were women who were actually beginning to step, or I mean, on a massive scale, anyways. Women were starting to run for president. Women were starting to have debates with themselves on women's roles. Like, should women become more involved, right? Or should women stay in the private space? And if you guys haven't read the article, "The New Woman" by, um, I believe, Marie Della Reme, I think that's her name. But she goes by the pen name Oida, Ouida, and she was a British novelist, and she was a anti-suffragist. I find it very interesting how we always love to prop up the suffragists, but we want nothing to do or hear anything from the anti-suffragists, and the vast majority of the anti-suffragists being women, ironically. Uh, and so all of this was really beginning to take place all throughout the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, right? Where most people would believe that that women's suffrage took place. And so, yes, you did have that. You had workers' unions, you had, rights for workers, of course. But during this time, during the Industrial Revolution, there was something that was very sneakily happening. And that was oligarchies. Oligarchies were on the rise, and they were creating monopolies on the oil industry, the gas industry, the railroad industry. A lot of these companies who started from nothing began to monopolize, these different sectors. And I mainly think of Rockefeller because Rockefeller was one of the most douchebaggy people of all time. and he obviously did not care about his employees, so much so that he said that he wants a nation of workers and not a nation of thinkers. So that really tells you who he was. So you have all of these oligarchs on the rise, and then you have government that was actually being funded by these oligarchies, these corporations, these CEOs, right, to essentially turn the other cheek, right? And that's exactly what happened. They would make deals with each other, and that hasn't changed. And so, um, at that point in time, things really began to explode. Yes, unions began to really go on the rise, and workers' rights were really big, really took a turn there, especially in the teens, in the 19 teens. And so the biggest disappointment of that century was definitely it was 1917 when the government had ratified the 16th Amendment, and that was to collect taxes, right? And that's due to Teddy Roosevelt, right, who wanted to implement some kind of internal revenue system to tax the rich. All of these oligarchies were making so much money while the average person was hardly making anything, right, barely surviving. You can see a lot of the pictures of back then. A lot of them were in the slums. They couldn't even afford to feed themselves, while these people who started these companies were raking in, I mean, just so much cash. So, there was something that was being done about it. Now, beforehand, there was a tariff system that was put in place, and that was actually making the US quite a bit of money. But at some point, Teddy Roosevelt thought it was such a great idea to start taxing the rich, and that created the IRS. And so we all know how that turned out, through oligarchs, and ever since this time period, all throughout, the oligarchs and government have been working hand in hand to create, to scratch each other's backs, essentially, which led to companies becoming their own personhood, right? And so that's why big companies now get such massive tax breaks, and the average person like you and me don't get shit. So after the war, because unfortunately not a lot of people, not a lot of men, were were returning home from war. There was a there was a obviously a population boom and an economic boom, because there was such a lack of people there as well. And so that's definitely what I believe uh, to be one of the biggest reasons for uh, the success of the baby booming era. Um, and that is because there was a lack of people that were coming back. When you have a lack of when you have less of a population, right, and more of a currency circulation, because of how America was making some decent money off of the other countries that were involved in the war prior, right? Obviously, there's going to be more excess when it comes to currency. And so that's what led to all of the, families being so successful. Well, in the 60s, that began to change because inflation began to rise, and wages began to stagnate. And so, that's really what has led us to today. Everything has become more expensive. And, well, our wages still stagnate. They haven't gone up a whole lot. They I mean, there's just there's just nothing for us. There's nothing for us. And you look at how COVID played out. And when I mention oligarchies, that's exactly what I mean, because the small businesses were shut down, were threatened to be imprisoned, while you had places like Walmart, Walgreens, Kroger, they were allowed to operate. Not only that, but they were also allowed to have policies broken. So, there. I mean, it's just this is that this is that. I mean, it's so blatant now, and people aren't doing anything about it. And then you also have the education system, right? If I remember correctly, college used to be free. Healthcare used to be free, if I remember correctly. Could be wrong on that, but as far as I know, I think it used to be free. And now, or at least here in the States, I think, and now it's astronomically expensive, way more expensive than what it should be. And it's because we have monetized every single thing. We have commodified every single thing within our lives here in America, unfortunately. Education, health, right? Beauty, every single thing. And back to the education, we weren't taught to critically think. We were taught to memorize. We were taught to follow in line, follow in lockstep. And when you and this is exactly Rockwell's wet dream, because when you start from the ground up, when you start when you start conditioning children from the start, and you raise them to live in a society where people think a certain way, you must think the certain way, you must do this certain thing, right? You must graduate high school, you must go to college, get a degree, and you must get a job, you must have a family. People begin to act in that sort of way, right? The human condition is to take the path of least resistance. And so you go to college, or you graduate high school, you go to college, you get a job, you have a family, right? Anything outside of that is going to face, criticism, shame, even. And so, people don't want to experience that, right? Especially women. Women don't do well with shame at all. And so, um, we were conditioned to live this way instead of critically think for ourselves. And now people are starting to wake up, and this is the red pill. You're waking up to everything that we were lied to about, everything. And not just men and women, but every single thing that's gotten us here. Am I wrong on everything that I've talked about today? No, of course not. I don't believe I am. I could be wrong about a lot of things, right? I do believe I'm right. And you guys are more than welcome to correct me. But I know for a fact, overall, I am right. I know for a fact I am. Because if things were working today, I would have already had a family by now. I would be raising children right now. I wouldn't have even had to start my YouTube. If things were going so well here in America, or here in the West even, and these issues we're not just having here in the West, it's also in the East as well. Japan is having a massive problem. I mean, their economy is doing a lot worse than what ours is. And then you also have Korea. Korea is doing bad too. I mean, their birth rate is in shambles. But It's the social engineering, right? On social media, the news, politicians campaigning on certain things, constantly. I mentioned men being bashed down, or men being beaten down constantly, and that's from everywhere to include women, unfortunately. Women have been conditioned to behave against their own best interest, and then right through hookup culture, through this misandrous culture, and then men have also been conditioned to act against their own best interest by just giving up, right? Or just giving women what they want. And then when I say giving up, I mean giving up on everyone, women, society, everything. But here's also the thing too, is that the system is so far broken, it just needs to be taken down completely and rebuilt. Right? There's too much broken to be fixed. It's not fixable at this point. It needs to be redone. And so that's what we have to do. We have to rebuild it from the ground up. That's the only way to fix this issue. But it's been designed to be broken. You understand? It's designed this way. The fact that most people can't afford homes is designed. The fact that people can hardly find jobs today is designed. It's about control, conditioning. The few wants to have complete authority over the majority. It is the war on the haves versus the have-nots. Or excuse me, it's the war on the have-nots from the haves. And that's the way it's always been. The haves will always start war with the have-nots. Why? Because the haves depend on the have-nots. And that's the truth. We have greedy corporations who are sucking up every resource they can like a fucking parasite from the have-nots. And the have-nots just let it happen. I was super proud. I was super proud when everyone protested in Virginia. When Governor Northam was going to make people felons overnight. I was super, super proud of that. Because that is the heart of an American. Defiance when it comes to tyranny. So that's what it means to be American. What it actually means to be American. To uphold the Constitution, whether you are a service member, a veteran, or a civilian that's never served. So there is a way to fix this, and I talked about it earlier. We got to rebuild the system entirely, right? That doesn't mean anything violent, of course, and I wouldn't want anything like that to happen anyways. But the system is so far broken that it just needs to be redone. So, but that is the red pill. That is the red pill. Realizing that it's not just men and women who have had issues, but that men and women are acting in their nature in a toxic way because we've been conditioned to act in our nature in a toxic way. Because the average person has been screwed so far that we see nothing past that. When I talked about oligarchs screwing over the average person, there's something else to that too, and that was, shipping jobs overseas where they can avoid paying more for employment and in turn receive more in profits, right? That's why That's why a lot of the times when you call somewhere, it's typically someone who is foreign. Quite a few times. So, there's nothing wrong with offshoring, of course. It's just there is something completely wrong with doing that at the expense of, the average American. Can't go into factories anymore because factories don't pay. They can't. Factories can't afford, living these days. Used to be able to, but now they don't. Just because, like I said, inflation. Another thing too is when we decided to centralize our currency, right? And then we got off of the gold system. You know, that's what really killed our economy too. So we get rid of the Federal Reserve. We go back onto a gold system. That's going to be that's going to be a step in the right direction. But again, that's a part of rebuilding the system. So, again, nothing violent, right? No threats or anything. But it just has to be redone. So, but and then there's also another thing too that I forgot to talk about, and well, it's related to the short that I was talking about a couple of days ago, or no, it was yesterday actually. I was talking about uh, stop voting, either red or blue, and we've also been conditioned to vote with just two parties. Despite our founding fathers warning us of a multi-party system, we've done exactly that. And now we have people who are at each other's throats because they don't vote Republican or they don't vote Democrat. And they refuse to look at anything outside of their own party. This cultism. And that's the real scam of America. It's not just multi-level marketing companies. It's the fact that they can convince you to vote for someone or vote for a party simply because it's a party, right? That aligns a little bit with your morals and values and plays to them. And then as soon as they get into office, they then forget about you and then they constantly pander to these special interests that afforded them their position in office to begin with. That's the reality of it. And all of this is the red pill. All of it is the red pill. Now you just have to refrain from taking the black pill. And that's just walking away from everything and letting it all rot away. Because the system is, again, so far broken that it's unfixable. And so it will break at some point. So, with that being said, guys, that is the actual red pill. That is the red pill. Waking up to that. And there's a lot more stuff that I can talk about. I could talk for hours on this stuff, but I wanted to condense it down, into at least a 45-minute video. And so we're pretty much right at that. So, yeah, if you guys happen to have anything specific that you want me to talk about, just let me know. And I'll be more than happy to. So, let me know what you guys think. I'm always curious to hear what you guys have to say. So, that being said, guys, if you enjoyed the video or if this video really helped you out, please like, share, subscribe, join the family. I would love to have you guys join the family and help me to change this society for the better, because I'm not giving up on you guys, so please don't give up on me. All right. Make sure you're taking care of yourselves, both mind and body. Take care of each other. If you need me for anything, just reach out. My door's always open. I love you all. Wish you a lovely day. I'll talk to you guys soon.